G'day guys, back with the other circle, and I brought out a video yesterday, a very ranty video, and in that video I basically posed a question to the audience. I said, look, we're in a position right now where it is very hard to do the sort of content that I want to do for 30k, okay? Over the years we've built up this big and not unfounded perception of pure salt on this channel, which is not the direction I initially wanted to head in with it. And I was racking my brain going, okay, what are the problems I'm facing as a content creator? And I brought up some of them in the video yesterday. Like, I'm talking about list creation, the fact that so many things haven't been released that are necessary for the game system. And of course, along with that, there are perceptions like gatekeeping, for better or worse, for 30k that have obviously, people have it in their heads that the outer circle, massive gatekeeper, hates people from 40k coming into 30k, etc., etc. 30k, is it more popular now than it used to be? All these different things that need to be spoken about. So I thought that's what I would do with this video today. So I'll call this 30Kurious, because I want to make this video more for the people who are just getting into it or aren't sure about the system as a whole. So first thing I want to cover is 2.0 more popular than 1.0? And I would say it is probably more popular at the moment. And I don't think that's an unfair thing to say because, well, it's just such an easy entry barrier compared to the last edition, at least for the Space Marines. And of course, Space Marines do make up the majority player base of the system. To say otherwise is to be not telling full truths. So, with the Age of Darkness box set, that means that people, like you go over onto Games Workshop, this Age of Darkness box set, it's big, it's expensive, but it is an easy way for people to get into the game. If they want to build a Space Marine force, it's not a terrible starting point. Yes, it's got its problems, but overall, compared to Heresy 1 and pre-Betrayal at Kelth, pre those plastic kits, it was a lot harder to get into Heresy 1. It meant going to Forge World, buying their miniatures, learning to work with the resins, learning to work with warping, huge mold lines, all these problems that you just don't get with the plastics, because the plastics are so much nicer. They're less posable and things like that with the Mark 6. I get all those problems. I fully hear you. But on the whole, let's say, easier to get into, a little bit better off in that regard. Great. So it is definitely going to be more popular from that standpoint. You also have the people who are fleeing 40k because, well, like what happened with Heresy at the tail end of 7th, lots and lots of people were coming into Horus Heresy. Then people started coming across into Heresy again at the tail end of 9th, because as 40k starts burning to the ground every edition, people want to play a similar game to what 40k was in the past, something more balanced, and Heresy tends to be that. It really just depends whether or not you like the 7th edition rule set. Some will argue that 40k has the better rule set, some will argue that 30k does. Obviously, you'll know where my preferences lie if you've hung around the channel for a little while. But it is going to determine which you prefer. So, okay, Heresy is in this place now. Great. So, you're getting into 30k and you think, geez, I've seen some of Outer Circle's earlier videos. That guy's a massive gatekeeper and he doesn't want my 40k community involved. And that's not true. So I've stated the point in the past, but I really want to reiterate it. It's all about the level of effort that you're putting into the community that you are joining. So if you're in your own little isolated 40k community, have nothing to do with the external 30k community, you can make whatever group you want. And you're fully entitled to it. No one's going to judge you for it, or at least shouldn't judge you for it. But if you are a 40k player and you're going to come over to an existing 30k community that's 10 years old, and then expect to come in and just upend the thing with what you perceive the game should be, you're going to get a clash. And that's where my quote-unquote gatekeeping comes in. Because I feel like you shouldn't be trying to change the community that you're attempting to join to suit your needs or your means. That's not fair on the rest of the community. Because everyone, and me especially, okay, I am far from always right. And I do a lot of opinion pieces on this channel. It doesn't mean it's the correct opinion just because I'm holding it. All I'm doing is sharing it in the most loud, blunted, obnoxious way possible most of the time. That can be perceived as talking down to the audience, that can be perceived as outright insulting the audience, but it is just an opinion piece because I am no better than my audience. We are all people who just enjoy the hobby. But if I'm to come into someone else's group and say, you need to do this, 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 and this, that would be just as wrong. It would be just as wrong of me to do that. So that is not the approach to take. But for 40k players, many people who don't quite understand the gatekeeping argument have to understand that there are two bad things that 40k players do coming into 30k. The first is it's the very obvious one, which is they come across with a 40k competitive mindset. And 30k does not do well with that as a whole. Now, there are exceptions to this as a rule, but when you come across into a game that is very narrative heavy and you bring across a I want to win all my games attitude, that does not mesh well with the existing community. Okay, and 40k, for better or worse, very much has bred that mindset into its players. There is all this talk of meta. Meta is not really a concept in 30k. It does exist. I'd be lying if I said otherwise, but it is very different to what 40k currently portrays as the meta. In 30k, there is not really a here is new army, everyone gets on new army mentality. It's not really a thing. Instead, there are just poster children in Heresy, like the Imperial Fists and Sons of Horus, who people gravitate towards because they're poster children. But you'll find that every faction, despite how well their performance is portrayed on the tabletop, is played in 30k. You do see lots of Salamanders, you do see lots of Raven Guard, you do see lots of Thousand Suns, even though all three legions have rather lackluster rules this edition, which I've covered pretty extensively. You'll see army schemes that are hard to paint, like White Scars or World Eaters, because when they're done well, they look gorgeous. So all of that's fine. But the second thing that 40k players do when they come across to Heresy is they bring their 40k armies across. And there seems to be this real disconnect between what is and isn't good in a 30k army. And probably the biggest thing, and I'll explain this in some detail today, so do forgive me, but people come across and they pull this. They bring something like this Captain Messinius, or the Primaris Ancient, or, Intercessors, whatever it might be, Assault Intercessors. They bring them across into 30k, these models that are very 40k and very 40k armors with 40k paint schemes. They've got heraldry that isn't right for the period, scale is all out of whack, and they bring them across into 30k and go, well, these are Space Marines, the game uses Space Marines, therefore these things are one and the same. And that immediately is a problem for many people in 30k because they're looking at their, either a mixture of expensive Forge World and recast armies, but armies that they've put a lot of time into what is essentially what I call a pseudo-historical. It's not a historical game like Bolt Action. It's not a World War II game. It's not a English Civil War game, Napoleonic game. But the game has a written history. And it says, these are the events that take place, these are the notable characters and generals within this history, this is the campaign they fought. They even go as far as showing you the maps, telling you the troop dispositions, the works. They have missions written to recreate those campaigns. 40k tends to not do that. They do some campaign books, but it's nowhere near like what 30k is. And so when you come across and just have a Marines are all the same attitude, it doesn't jive well with the wider community. Now, again, if you're a 40k player playing with your 40k friends and you all decide that, you know what, we don't like the direction of 10th edition, we're going to play 30k with our Primaris armies, no one is going to stop you. But the minute you leave your bubble and you try and join a traditional, we'll call it traditional 30k bubble, well, something's got to give. And that's the problem here. If someone is putting in the effort, you bring on those intercessors and you've cut around the knees, you've turned the armor into something that looks like Mark 6 or Mark 4, you've put different backpacks on them, different shoulder pads on them, change out the bolt guns. You actually put the effort into making them look more period authentic. Well, that's a different story. Okay, because the effort has been put in there, and 30k got its start really among the community with us converting things like Beakies and the occasional bits of Mark 4 you got in Power Armor 15, 20 years ago. That's when we really got started as a 30k community. We convert our armies from 40k, and it is still acceptable to do so today. People might not like the look of the 30k Outriders, so they come over to Games Workshop and they buy these Outriders. Same name, funny enough. They buy these 40k Outriders, and if you go about changing the torso, because remember that skull-winged Aquila thing on the chest is not a thing in 30k, realistically, as many other symbols aren't. Again, pseudo-historicals. But if you convert up those bikes, you give them period-accurate weapons and riders, people are not typically going to complain. There'll always be a purist holdout who is just, you must be 100% 30k miniatures. Don't listen to them. They're taking it too far. Okay? But something like the Thunderfire cannon there, if someone rocked up with 3 of those Thunderfire cannons and said, this is my quad mortar rapier battery, I am not going to say a peep about it. In fact, I'll probably compliment them if they've done a great paint job on it, because why wouldn't I? I want to encourage that sort of behaviour in the community, because, hell, it's the right size, it's got basically the identical weapon. Yeah, okay, good enough for me. But if you rock up with Primaris Reavers, exactly as they come out of this box here, and say, well these are my Space Marine Seeker squad, yeah, you're going to have problems. So that's the divide between the communities. And there are a lot of 40k units. If you want to use a 40k Land Raider, go for it. Just get rid of some of that 40k obvious stuff. Like, you shouldn't be seeing that Stormbolter on there, and you shouldn't be seeing the Aquila on top of the assault ramp on the front. Maybe change the sponsors out. You can 3D print stuff these days, or buy conversion parts, whatever it might be. People are going to be totally cool with it. Same as land speeders. You want to use these land speeders in 30k? Change the crew torsos, shoulders, and helmets. I did it for a friend's Alpha Legion. We put Mark IV torsos, shoulder pads, and helmets on the crew. Instantly, it's a 30k looking land speeder. And it's only those tiny little bits of effort that make a huge difference. But it's when people do relatively small or absolutely minimal amounts of efforts. If all they do is take something like these Blade Guard veterans and do a shoulder pad swap, that is not far enough for me personally. Okay? And that's the thing. It's for me personally. This is an opinion, guys. Like I said, I'm not 100% correct. I'm a community member, not the arbiter of right and wrong. So that's just sort of a guide to using some of these 40k units and what people want to be seeing. They just don't want to be seeing you port over 40k models from the Primaris range with absolutely zero minimal effort, because if you're going to be a long-term participant in the community, it's just not very... I guess perception is that you're not putting in an equal amount of effort to the people around you who want to be doing recreations of these events. You're coming in with just the, I'm lazy, here's what I've got mentality. That's the perception. I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's the perception. When there are so many great parts and conversion options available to you from 40k. Take this Primaris Tech Marine. If you took the servo arms, cut them off that backpack, glued them onto a 30k backpack, maybe used his bionic arm, there'd be nothing wrong with using a lot of parts off that miniature. But when you go using the stock Mark 10 power armor that he's wearing, and it's just this model, and you just use him verbatim in 30k, that's just laziness. That's not putting the effort in. And that's where people draw the line. It's an effort. Okay? Then you've got armies like the Mechanicum. Mechanicum's another one that's hard to, there are some models like Techno-Archaeologist, the Skitarii Marshal. These models can proxy over really nicely into the Mechanicum range in 30k. The Castellan robots, I mean, you could use them as Castellax at a pinch, but they look a lot worse than Castellax. You can use some Skitarii. The Electro Priest with some conversion might make decent Myrmidons. There's options there, but again, it's putting in that effort and doing the conversion to them. Cataphon Breaches, another one that would make great Myrmidon proxies, or potentially work as another automata type, especially if it's very distinct and obvious what the units are from one another. If they all look like the same mishmash of machinery and they've all got totally different rules, that confuses people and annoys them. So just avoid doing that. Belisarius Call, Tech Priest, Engine Seer, they go over pretty nicely. Unfortunately, the Dune Rider and the Disintegrator, they have no analog in 30k that looks the same, and yeah, you could probably use the Archaeopter as an Arvis lighter or something, but it just doesn't suit the ground and realistic look of 30k. So they're things to avoid. But if you wanted something like tech thralls, there is nothing stopping you from taking like Imperial Guard miniatures, for example. You got all these Astra Militarum, Cadian shock troops. You could go to somewhere like I've just picked Cromwell, okay? But there are many other manufacturers there. There could be Victoria Miniatures, Anvil Industries, whatever it might be, Puppets War. But Cromwell makes some nice stuff. You go into Cromwell here, and you could be going through. They've got stuff that you could make a militia army with, but you might find that there are biomechanical Imperial Guard proxies that are sold in here that you might be able to use parts of. Say you find some bionic heads, for example. Bionic heads, bionic arms. You could put those bionic heads onto stock Cadian bodies, and all of a sudden you've created some tech thralls. And it's some nice terrain on here too now, looking at it. I don't mind those container stacks. But yeah, those are things you could do. You've also got things like, this is my Colts page. So my Colts 3D, I am making a militia, basically everything in the militia rules that doesn't necessarily have matching models for it in 30k. I've just been making them, for a relatively good price for people to print. I've even done these little free vehicle dials, which this was the test one. I want to make more of them. The idea of the Adamus hull dial here is that you can, how many hull points does the vehicle have left? What is the effect on it? Is it stunned? Is it shaken? Is it being affected by a neutron weapon? Is it immobilized or not? I was trying out some sort of dial, and I made it free because of that. I did the rock. I made a version of the rock for the Dark Angels, which was it was exactly for the Lion release. I thought, for people who play BFG, maybe they want to print this out. So I made 3D render of it, combined other bits of 3D models together, because I wanted to create the Dark Angels rock as a suitable flying space fortress. Right down to a little BFG ship docked on there. I've got elements of other Ramilli Star Fortress in there. I've made this sort of six-sided fortress out of it to try and represent like the six wings of the hexagamaton. And I made it free. Right, and there are plenty of things like this out there that people can get. I've also been doing Legion weapons, so I've got equivalents to Graviton Shredders. Okay, can't call them that because copyright and such, but they don't make them for the game. So I made them in one hand for Terminator. So I made Graviton Shredders for Iron Hands players. I also made Felix Blades for World Eaters players, because Felix Blades are a crucial weapon. And I intend to do Legion Specialist weapons for all the different Legions. So I've got the tilted at the wrist versus the flat wrist, so the 4 different types, for left and right-handed. And I made them free? Yeah, I made them free. Because it's not important to me to be making money out of this. It's important for me to give you guys the tools that I can, because I like to think I'm not such a terrible person, and I want to give you the tools for your armies that you're otherwise lacking. But if I spend a bit of time sculpting something, then I try and recoup the cost that was spent on it. Hence, you'll get a tank like this, $10. Why? Because I spent a long time sculpting that tank. I spent several hours sculpting it, and I want to, if I can sell 10 of it, I've made my money back, is the way I look at it. And $1.50 for the Shredding Graviton weapon, and that was only because I had to draw the hand, which took the longest time of all. I've got a little Dreadnought up here, and some different vehicles and variants and stuff like that. But there are tons of cults pages and tons of people who sculpt far better than me. I really want to emphasize that point. And you can go onto here and you can just search different names of weapons, and you'll probably find something similar floating around. Like if I click on my mobile artillery here, we'll probably get some suggestions of similar units down the bottom. See, someone's got a Night Scythe parts, they've got different artillery parts. Look, this is Votan stuff right here. Space Marine heavy weapons stuff there. So, some not Tyranid stuff. Look at that. Dark Angels Interrupters from the looks of those. These things are all over the internet if you're into them. I'm just the rookie player in this, far from the best at it. But combining these parts together with your 40k kits, you can create an excellent 30k army if you're getting into it. And nobody is going to judge you for it if you put in the time, the effort, and you do it, quote unquote, right. So that's my little bit of advice there. And for the Space Marines, I wanted to talk about this for a while, and I was trying to figure out how to do the part 3 episode, but I was waiting on other plastic kits to drop, which haven't come out yet. Okay, that's the thing. So like these vibro katanas, for example, perfect for a White Scars player to put on squad sergeants, just to spruce them up a little bit, to give them a little something. These Omega Thunder Shields, they're a storm shield or a combat shield or a boarding shield. Why not? What else they got in here? So they got proxies for different bodies. Now, I'm not saying you need to make a full army out of these, but these look far more period authentic, power armor wise, than something like Mark 10 power armor from Kane's Workshop. If you took the occasional body and interspersed it amongst your army, no one's going to mind at all. These are tarantulas, basically, these sentry guns. You've got the heavy weapon on treads. That's clearly a rapier type platform. Fantastic. Nothing wrong with using and proxying in these things and making these armies feel your own. As long as the effort has been put in there, no one is going to complain or put you down for your efforts. So that's really, for the 30Kurious, where your head should probably be at for this stuff. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it for me on this little bit of a 30Kurious episode. I want to be creating content where I can try and inspire you. I can try and say to the community, like, these are fun games. Let's have the most fun we can with them. The problem is, at the same time, my conscience says that I can't ignore poor business practices by the company. And at some point, those two things clash. And I often feel bad about it. I often sit there after putting up a video going, man, I feel like such a whinging loser. But the problem is you shouldn't be feeling that way. Critique is accepted across the board in so many different communities. It's just not accepted in Warhammer. I mean, I am despised on Reddit, if you go onto Reddit, because the attitude is everything he says is whining and salt. Well, it's like, it's not. That's literally half of the videos I put out. The other half is all videos like this one. It's like, hey, if you want to get into the game, you want to play it, here's things you can look at, here's conversions you can do. But people, they just ignore it. At the end of the day, they see what they want to see. And you know what? I've bought it on myself too, because I have made those videos with the swearing and the whining and the complaining. As I say to people, it's not where I want to be at. I would rather be making videos more like this one, about how to get into the hobby, and especially the gatekeeping stuff. You just gatekeep. No, there are standards within the hobby that we try to adhere to, okay? People who say there are no standards at all in the hobby, they're lying, because the company is showing you what the standard roughly is. They show it to you on the art of the boxes. They show it to you in the painted miniatures in the box. That's the standard. That's the goal you should be striving towards. It's a painted army that looks decent on the tabletop. Now, there are disabilities and things like that might prevent people from doing so. Okay, but that is the exception, not the rule. I'm not going to judge someone who's a poor painter because of their disability. That would be completely unfair. But if someone's a poor painter because they don't care and they're lazy, why can't you judge them for it? Let me turn to page 104 of Social Conventions and find, where the rules of how to conduct yourself in human civilization and see where I can find that it says you can't do that. Well, you won't find it because, unfortunately, everyone has their own subjective measure of what is right and wrong in the hobby and what is right and wrong for one person to do to another in society. And for me personally, I find that laziness is rather intolerable. So I often pick on it. But that doesn't mean that I'm picking on everyone for everything all of the time. New players getting into the game deserve support. They deserve us to be there telling them how that they can improve things, but also complimenting them on what they've done right, because people aren't going to get everything right when they start the game. They're going to come in, they're going to paint things incorrectly, they're going to do bad conversions. It's the hard part is just straddling that line between good and bad conversion and saying, look, this conversion is not great, and here's why, versus saying this conversion is awful and you should feel bad. And I myself am guilty of the latter. I have been very harsh with my critique before of people's conversions because it's not easy. It is really not easy. Like, ask yourself, how do you, when someone puts their model out there publicly and says, I want feedback on this, how do you politely tell them that something looks awful to your subjective viewpoint? It is actually a very difficult thing to do. Everyone likes to think they have the answers to these problems. It's like everything in life. As adults, we like to think we have the answers to all the problems that get thrown at us. But how many times have you had a conversation with someone at work or whatever it might be, and then come away from that conversation going, man, I should have said this, right? And it comes to you afterwards. It's the same thing with the hobby. You know, someone will say, I want feedback on this. You give it to them, and then you sit there afterwards going, man, that was a little harsh. That came out wrong, or they've misconstrued it, or that's not my intent. We've all done it, okay? And for people on the receiving end, if you go out there and say, I want critique on this, well, try not to be offended when you get the critique on it. That's where the finer line is when people are showcasing their miniatures and then say, I want critique on this, and the minute they get any anti-critique, anyone coming on and saying to them, that's not so great, they just shut it down and go, well, you're just wrong. It's like, but why did you ask for criticism in the first place if you just wanted your cock sucked? You know, I don't know, it's just things that I've noticed. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. I hope you've learned a little something from this 30 Curious video. Maybe about me and my perceptions more than anything, but I want to do more videos like this in future, and I'll talk a little bit about 10th and the direction that 10th edition's 40k is going in, but I really am sick to death of telling people how bad the company is. So I feel like either people have woken up to it or they're never going to wake up to it at this point. The company is not our friend, they are our enemy, because everything they're doing is in spite of the community, not for the community, and it's outrageous. You know, but that's my subjective viewpoint at the end of the day. As I said, I'm not the arbiter of right and wrong, I'm just giving you an opinion. Don't feel like you have to sit there in the comments and agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. It's just my opinion, my take on the situation. And of course, I'm very vociferous about it. I say, well, here's what I really strongly suggest that the situation is. I'm not going to say that. Either you got the confidence to back your opinions up or you don't. Okay? So don't expect me to come in here and hold people's hand and say, look, I really do think I'm correct about this, but your opinion with zero evidence is of equal value. It doesn't exactly work like that. But if I'm, you know, out here putting out the opinion, expect me to strongly suggest it to you. Okay? Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and thoughts and feedback below. I'll see you on the next video.